Just want to let everyone know we are recording this and it will go up on the Elementary Instructional Services site. And Linda, if you want to go ahead and pull the site up on welcoming everyone, we can get that started. So thank you for being here, and for the sake of time, if you have any questions, we'd like you to go ahead and add that to the chat, and we'll answer throughout or get back to you through the chat or at the end of the session, okay? This will take up most of our time, and we want to be careful not to run over. If it does run over, it shouldn't be but a few minutes, okay? So with that said, let's go ahead and get started. The state, as you know, is allowing some flexibility for districts with the SOL assessment for Virginia studies. So Frederick County Public Schools will be giving the local alternative assessment to capture students' historical thinking through a task that is built around the 5 C's, as well as the competencies from Inspire 2025. Walk through the task requirements, you're going to be able to see some opportunities to get students to embrace their curiosity and formulate some new ideas from the past that have been taken. We want them to be creative, we want them to be innovative, so by giving them voice and choice, they'll have the opportunity to explore and expand Inspire 2025 competencies. So we want to take advantage of this opportunity for our students because we all know that the benefits of the performance task versus a multiple choice test. Remember that this is the first cohort also that's going through this local alternative assessment, and we're going to need your feedback. We're going to be placing a survey to gain some feedback on the site. And when we place that on the site, we don't want you to go through and answer it until after you upload your scores, okay? So the link to the video recording will be on the SOUPS page as well as the survey. So finally, as we move through the task, you're going to see some integration of science and social studies in this task. The name of the task is We All Live Downstream. That saying should be pretty familiar with the 4th grade teachers, just because it comes straight from the standards. So let's get started. Linda, you have the Elementary Instructional Services site up, if everyone could pull that up. And I'd like you to go to either the left and go to the Assessments tab, or you can click on the picture as well and go to the Assessments tab. So once you're on the Assessments tab, if you're pulling that up, I'd like you to scroll down to 4th grade Virginia Studies. Would you go into ARML's 4th grade Virginia Studies? 4th grade Local Alternative Assessment? Thank you. All right. So a few things that I want to talk about before we get started. One of the things you will not score your own class. You'll need to switch with someone on your team. You and your administrators will choose when you also score. If you could let us know when you're going to be doing that scoring by sending the instructional supervisor who's at your school an email letting us know that date, that would be great. All the scores that you are going to be entering will have to be in by June the 16th. This gives time to create letters that the parents will receive about their students, about how they did on the assessment. We'll be delivering some labels also to your schools with the 7,000 numbers on them, and this will help with scoring anonymously. After scoring, the homeroom teacher will add their students' scores. Okay? You'll also receive a hard copy titled Absentee Form when you receive the labels. You'll add only the students who are absent or who you did not get to take the assessment. So you will not be entering anything in the spreadsheet for the students that you did not assess, only for the ones that you did assess, okay? This NS, no score for anyone who did not complete. And then you'll fill that out on the paper as well. And then that document will be sent back to us. For the students who couldn't get to take the test for some reason, this will probably be mostly for your distance learners or if you have a refusal at school. But please make every attempt to get those students to complete it. Talk with your administrator to get administrative approval first to ensure all measures were taken to get that student assessed. On the absentee form that you receive, you're going to need to document the steps that were taken. For instance, did you talk with the student, parent conference, a phone call? Was it technology related? Is it parent refusal, student refusal, out sick, medical reasons, things like that. Same thing you would do for an SOL test. So now that we're going to now talk about the score sheets, okay? If you could go into, well, first let's go ahead and show them what we all live downstream. That's the only thing. You want to click on that. That's the only thing that's changed on this. This has been added for you. So if you want to go into that, and you can pull that up, and then we'll be talking about this in just a minute. But if you also want to go back to the site and pull the score sheets up, because that's what we're going to talk about now. Thank you. Just go down to the bottom. Okay, we want to open that up. Some of you will look at your score sheets, and I want to I think it's Jordan Springs know. You have a copy in yours that you will go into. The other one is being worked on, so we had to make a copy of it so you would have the same screens. Now, some of you may not see this listed like this. Right now, these are being updated. The 7,000 numbers will be put in for you, and the layout will be like this, okay? So if you notice, there's a score between 1 to 4, and then the comments. And we'll have to change you can leave withdrawn in there. It's a perfect comment. For anyone who's not tested, you would just put no score, and then we would get that documentation as well, okay? But these all should be populated in this way. That's why I'm showing you Arnold's, okay? But right now they're still working on this, and these will be uploaded and changed, okay? When you add your comments, the one thing I really want to hone in on, these comments will be transferred to a parent letter, and it will reflect how the student did based on the rubric. So be sure that you're checking for punctuation, grammar, spelling, all of that, and have someone proof your comments, because these will be lifted and then put in a letter that'll be sent to the students to let them know their score. There is a prerequisite to this lesson as well that you'll have to do prior to the actual history task. The prerequisite lesson is part of the MIWI that Linda's going to be talking about that 4th grade is required to do. So Linda's going to go through that lesson, and then I'll be back at the end to talk about the local alternative assessment, the follow-up activity that we'll have. Okay? Let me see if I'm missing anything at all. I don't think so, Linda. So if you want to take them to the other document.
Is this one?
Yes. Was there anything that was missing that you can think of?
I think so. Not right now.
Okay. And just at the very beginning where the overview is, it's the same thing that I've already talked to you about. So Linda, you want to take them into that prerequisite lesson?
Sure. Yes. And before I get to that, first, good morning and thank you for being here. As Sharon had mentioned, as a school division, we've decided to take advantage of this opportunity to assess students using a performance-based assessment in place of the Virginia Studies test. And not only does this affect your students in 4th grade, but it also reduces the number of standardized tests our 5th graders will take. So in addition to the replacement for the Virginia Studies test, students in 4th grade will also engage in what is called a meaningful watershed educational experience, or MIWE for short. So to give you a little bit of background on what a MIWE is, in 2014, the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement was signed, and it commits states in the region to prepare every student with knowledge and skills necessary to protect, and restore their local watershed. And the MIWIs seek to connect standards-based classroom learning with outdoor field investigations so that students have a deeper understanding of their natural environment. So specifically, a MIWI asks students to explore their local environment issues that exist around them through sustained teacher-supported programming. So the first begins with issuing the definition of the issue that exists. So students can focus on an environmental question, a certain problem that they've noticed, or perhaps even an issue that requires a little bit of background research and investigation. So once they identify the issue or the problem, they learn more about that through classroom instruction, collection of data, and through experiments. Part of the MIWI, after identifying what the issue is or what the problem is then providing an outdoor field experience for the students. That then becomes part of an action project. So this is not a one and done sort of thing. It is expected that perhaps there is an indoor piece to this and then an outdoor piece and then bringing it back into the classroom. And then students share their conclusions with the class, with their community. And that's where we have an opportunity to really let students get creative and share their voice. So Frederick County, in collaboration with Blandy Experimental Farms, has developed a MIWI to meet the criteria that I just talked about: the issue definition, the action project, the field experience, and the application. Because of COVID, we did have to kind of streamline what our original plans were. Originally, we were supposed to take the students to Blandy, have them go through field experiences on that property, and that will hopefully happen in the future. But for this year, everything will happen on your own campus. Not only does what we are about to describe today support the MIWI, but it also supports the LAA for Virginia studies. So really, this is kind of one big task that covers these two content areas. So when you hear us talk about, we all live downstream, we are talking about the local alternative assessment and the MIWI being pulled together to integrate content for one assessment. So let's take a look at what you will use first. So on this page, you see this prerequisite lesson, and you will begin this local alternative assessment with this watershed model lesson. So this is something you have access to. I'm confident you will go through it and look over it yourself. But I do want to make sure I touch on some really important things and, provide some explicit explanations for some of these things. So as you'll see in a lesson plan that many of you create, we've identified the SOLs. Very important, especially, when we talk about science investigations, to have that focus question. So that focus question will follow the students throughout both this watershed model lesson and the next. So yes, after the focus question, we've listed the objective. So given materials and resources, students will create and interpret a watershed model and use evidence to accurately explain the statement, "We all live downstream." Their enduring understanding, our actions directly impact our water quality and the water quality of others. Stating the relevance, we know, is an important piece of a lesson so that students know, why do I have to know this and how does this impact me? So understanding how your actions affect our water is important because having safe, quality water is necessary for plants and animals to survive. So the learning goal for students that you will share is that I can explain what the saying, "We all live downstream," means. So as you go through the lesson, you will see it's pretty explicit because we tried really not to leave anything open to interpretation. We wanted to make sure that we gave you as many details as necessary, but also trying to be mindful of, paring it down and not being overwhelming. So within the lesson, we have embedded opportunities for students to collaborate, to communicate, given the times that we are experiencing. I recognize that sometimes those are a little bit more difficult, but I know that many of you have found ways to still provide those opportunities for students during this time. So using those strategies will be important. So we begin the lesson by posing a think, pair, share question. Where does trash go after it leaves your house? There are trash cans in schools and businesses and everyone's home. So where does it all go after it leaves those places? You may have students who have some background knowledge in relation to this, and you may have some who aren't sure at all. So we're giving them an opportunity to think. We're giving them an opportunity to, pair up. And then perhaps even before you ask them to share with each other or aloud, you will take the students to this short video to activate their prior knowledge. And I think this video is just about 2 minutes long. So that's really there to add on to what some students may already know, but to also give a little bit of prior knowledge to some students who may not be bringing very much to this lesson. Following that think, pair, share, we begin notebooking. So we know that the model we use in FOSS contains that focus question, but it also contains the opportunities for students to record. And so students will create that title page in their book with the name of this task, We All Live Downstream, and they will glue the following picture in their graphic organizer. So this is something that you'll want to have printed and available for students before the lesson begins, so they can add this to their notebook. Now, I'm really zoomed in, so it's quite large, but you can see what the details of this picture are. I think, okay, I'll scroll back up. So we'll have students glue that in their notebooks, and after viewing that picture, they will also complete this graphic organizer, which should also be put into their notebooks. So they'll look at the picture and make some observations and write it down. What do they see? And they make a list of those. And then they also complete, I'm also thinking about, I wonder, and it gives them an opportunity to kind of prime themselves for the discussion that we're going to have. So then elicit a small discussion with the class. How do you think the trash got there? And let the students begin to brainstorm that. If you'd like, this is an opportunity for you to begin an anchor chart by capturing some important facts of the students' thinking. Here we just ask that you tell the students the enduring understanding and explain that they will demonstrate it by making a watershed model today. If this is the very first time that the students are hearing about watersheds, if you haven't taught it previously, which we would encourage you to do, but if you are finding a way to fuse that instruction in here, you can certainly do so. You can use the FOSS watersheds Virginia slides if necessary. So this was provided to us by FOSS, and it has lots of detail of watersheds, of the bodies of water that surround it, and gives lots of details. So like I said, if you haven't taught watersheds before getting to that, you have the opportunity to utilize that in your instruction here. Now, getting to the procedure. So there is a video demonstration of this exercise on this link. You can see my cursor there. And so I encourage you to watch it. There are very few wrong ways to do this because it is a very simplistic activity, but you will want to follow it in the order of the video just to make sure that it works out. And quite honestly, if something happens and it doesn't work out for a certain student or a couple of students, it's an opportunity for a great discussion on perseverance and trial and error and science. So after the students have recorded the focus question on a new page in a notebook, have them leave several lines of spacing so they can insert evidence throughout the lesson. Tell students to think about the focus question as they read this text, "We all live downstream." So we want to set a purpose for that reading and give them an opportunity to read this independently. It's not a lengthy piece, but it will, again, help to provide background information that they will use not only for this lesson, but also the next as well. Encourage students to use sticky notes, highlighter, or other means of noting evidence that supports answering that focus question. Once the reading is concluded, have students look at the evidence they noted and write a sentence or two that summarizes their thinking. You can elicit some volunteers for ideas or add to the anchor chart or utilize whatever strategy you know is best for your students. And then just briefly summarize what you've heard so far, and then you'll lead the students into the creation of the model. I do want to take a moment real quick. I heard we had a question come up in the chat, but Sharon answered that. We don't have science this year. Our kids do not have notebooks. Absolutely right. Is it okay for us to make it as a packet, or should we get notebooks? Honestly, thank you for asking that, Bridget. Whatever is best for you, whatever is most reasonable. Certainly don't want to ask parents to go out. I'm sorry, I think there's some background noise. Okay, thank you. We don't want to ask parents to go out and buy any notebooks or anything like that. So if you want to do like a makeshift notebook, that's certainly fine. Technology is also wonderful. So if you wanted to create this somehow in a Google Doc, we kind of have several options as to how to do that. So yeah, thank you for bringing up that point, Bridget. Okay, so getting to the creation of a model. So each student will get a piece of paper, 4 small pieces of tape, and a Ziploc bag of materials. In that Ziploc bag of materials will be 4 different colored markers and a little spray bottle. The teacher or student will have to fill the spray bottle with water, once the lesson has begun or prior to the start of the class. I do want to let you know that these Ziploc bags of materials have already been made for you. They will be delivered to your schools shortly after the spring break. And every single student is expected to participate in this. Distance learners, are not exempt from local alternative assessments. So there will be enough bags for all of the students in your class. So hybrid kiddos, distance learning kiddos, everybody will receive one of these bags. It's probably ideal, and we have been talking with your administrators to coordinate pickup for the distance learning students when families might pick up materials needed for the 4th quarter. And I know a lot of schools already have a routine in place for that. So whether it's on a certain day or the materials are outside in a box, you'll just want to make sure that parents are very aware who it's for and who it's not for, so that we have enough materials. So after you hand all of that out to your students, the water bottles are filled, you will model gently crumpling up the paper into a ball. And so you'll crumple it up, you'll flatten it out completely, or you will not flatten it out completely, because what we are looking for is a landscape with peaks and valleys. And so once you've kind of opened up that paper without completely flatten it, you just use those 4 pieces of tape to tape it onto the desk. That way it's not moving around or getting flattened. So then you'll tell the students what to do. So, we know that explicit direction is really important for students, and again, leaves nothing up for interpretation or wonder. So then have the students do exactly what you've done. Then again, we ask you to model, and you can do this perhaps under an Elmo or by whatever means that you typically use to show students, something that's you can't just hold up in front of the class. So you will use your 4 different colored markers to highlight different features of your landscape. So the first color, whatever it might be, will represent ridge lines, the highest points on the paper. The second color will be used to present the lowest places where water might be found. A third color will be used to draw a representation of human activity or something related to structures built by humans. And then finally, the fourth color will be used to draw a human figure. And you'll tell the students that represents them. That is where they are in their watershed. Now, they don't have to worry about where they necessarily are on that map. It's just really at the end to show them that what they do affects their water and their environment, even though sometimes they feel very separated from it. Okay, so just to recap, we've asked the question, we've watched the video, we've looked at that picture with all of that pollution. We've created now a watershed model with a piece of paper, and we are asking students to then highlight those portions on their model. So now in the notebooks, students will record a prediction. So what will happen to the map if we spray it with water? And they make a prediction of what they think will happen and why. So have the students lightly spray their maps. And these water bottles that you'll have, they are the smallest water bottles I've ever seen. I think they hold like 2 ounces of water maybe. So the students can't soak their maps unless for some reason it's not screwed on tightly, but just have them make sure it's working prior to the lesson. But we've put them together. They work very well. They don't contain a lot of water. So that's a good thing. So once students begin to lightly spray their maps, they should stop once they see the colors beginning to run down the mountainsides and pool. And then model a think aloud. Explain what you are seeing, explain what you're thinking, what that spray represents. And this is really a teaching opportunity to talk about where the water is traveling, how the colors are running downstream. And then some of the text that we've put in here is directly from curriculum documents. So we do want to explain about the surface water flow, and other watershed materials can be added. And then they should define that term watershed in their notebooks. So this really is where they begin to see how a watershed works, and what a watershed actually is. At this point, it would be a good opportunity to revisit the learning goal and ask students to be thinking about it as they continue to add their rain to their maps. So if they want to go ahead and add more water, then it opens up an opportunity to talk about flooding and other things that may happen. And specifically, we want them to notice what happened to the picture they drew of themselves. So, at this age, we will have students who can make that connection. So the picture of them that they drew in a marker should start to run or, bleed into the other water. So making a connection that, hey, the things that I do, look, I'm in here and I'm affecting the water. And so the things that I do in my real life also affect the watershed or the water around me. So we're looking for that connection. Depending on where your students are, you may have to prompt and provide that a little bit more for them to see that. Here we have a few questions that you can ask the students just so that they have a deeper understanding of what is going on, and they're able to make those connections between what am I seeing on paper and what is actually happening in a real watershed. Again, opportunity to add to an anchor chart to capture thinking if you'd like to. So following that creation of a simple watershed model, this is where we have an opportunity for students to communicate and collaborate with each other. What does this model tell you about watersheds? Have them look back at their notes about the predictions they've made, the things they learned from the reading, and then have them go back into that graphic organizer that they made in the beginning. Can they change any of the statements that they wrote in the I wonder column to now I learned, right? So I wonder how all that trash got there. Well, now maybe they can turn it, I learned that it's possible for trash to accumulate in a body of water. How? Again, you may want to provide some sentence stems or some prompts to your students. Have your students add more detail and finalize their responses to the focus question based on the discussion that you just had, and they can share those ideas out with their class. So for the closure, if you've been recording on an anchor chart, refer back to the anchor chart and have students answer what they think it means to say we all live downstream, right? So that was the goal of the lesson. That's what we wanted them to be able to do. So getting them to say that and pulling it out of them is the important piece. And so we can have students share responses, and then all students will record the response in their notebook. At the close of a lesson, it's always a nice idea to give a student a preview of the next lesson. So letting them know, hey, what we did today is setting us up for the next piece. So you'll explain to students, they'll be using their knowledge of watershed and the idea that we all live downstream in the following lesson. And they will make connections between what they learned today and what they've been learning in Virginia studies throughout the year to solve a mystery. For the assessment, again, we will give you ideas as to how you can do some of these things. We certainly know you have lots of great ideas. So please know that these are just suggestions. But this 3-2-1 activity is one that could certainly be used at this time. 3 things you've learned or that surprised you, 2 questions they have, and 1 thing that was meaningful that can help them think about the role they play in their environment, in their watershed. Finally, the last thing, these are some fantastic resources that are provided by a variety of different groups. So I highly recommend you checking these out. The videos are great. Again, the Foss Watershed slideshow. This activity or this story, we did modify it because it was from, I believe, Fairfax County, and we did get permission to utilize it. So I just wanted to point that out there. But this is a story of a watershed, of a water drops journey through the watershed. And it can be something that you do in class. It could be something that is sent home, but it really is a great way for students to get that context of the lesson in a literacy environment. So that is the first part, or the prerequisite, as we said, for this local alternative assessment. So making that watershed model. Now, the following piece that we will get to, and I will touch on these standards in just a moment, is let's go to the teacher page titled We All Live Downstream. So We All Live Downstream is, as you know, the title of the local alternative assessment. The first portion that we just did was the watershed model. And now this second portion is called the mystery of the dead fish. So the watershed model was science-based, right? The only science standards that you are teaching this year. And now this is the history-based piece. So I will give everybody just a few minutes to open this up if they'd like, and I will zoom back in case that was the way in which folks want to view the lesson.
There's some great questions in the chat. So I want to make sure that everyone's reading those. In your experience, how much time should we plan for this lesson? And I said, just remember again that this is done throughout the quarter. You remember you're the first cohort also to go through this. We do want your honest feedback at the end on what we do to make some tweaks. And again, there's some flexibility in this, because the part that you have to make sure that you get the scores down so we can report out to parents is for the history part. Okay. So again, talk with us about it. If you're coming up with any problems, or if you need another way to get this out to distance learners, we're here for you. And again, on very short notice that we were able to do this, that's why we don't know some of these details. We weren't able to pilot it like we would have wanted to. So again, thanks for the question, Bridget. Great question, but I can't give you an honest answer on that. Okay, we're just going to do the best that we can.
Yeah, and honestly, I think it certainly depends on how much time you have allotted for science or social studies. Ideally it is 45 minutes, but I recognize that not everybody uses that much time or has that much time. So, certainly more than one day. I know I can't give you an exact answer, but I would, think that several days will be necessary for this if you're talking about, a 30 to 40 minute window. But like Sharon said, this is not something that has to be done all at once. It can be something that is done throughout the course of the quarter. So once students have created the watershed model and gain an understanding of what it means to live downstream, they will apply that knowledge to a historically based scenario. So let's take a look at the mystery the students will be solving in the task titled Mystery of the Dead Fish. And we'll start by looking at the teacher page. So the very first part of this, as you're explaining it to your students, of course, there are student pages as well. And we've linked the student page at the very, very bottom of this document. But we want you to know with this, and honestly, with many other local alternative assessments, students can complete these individually, in partners, in small groups. We really want to look for, those opportunities to bring the students together and to learn from one another. But of course, they will be scored independently. You may want to record presentations, and you'll find out what those presentations are in a little bit, but you may want to record them in order to complete the rubric at a later time. And basically, just to give you a quick synopsis, students will be presenting some findings to a community group, which really is just their peers in their classroom. Or if you really want to change that up and have them present to peers in another classroom or in any other manner, that's fine. But that content of the presentation is what you will use to grade the students. So unless you can be present for every presentation, you may decide to have the students record themselves, and then you could watch it at a later time in order to provide that grade. But I will speak in more detail about that in just a moment. So the first part of this task is where the students are going to be introduced to the problem. So you can see in this that it is the season of a year in a particular region. And the student is staying with a relative named whatever, who lives near a certain place, town, city within that region. It has been raining, sleeting, snowing, depending on the season they pick, all week, and they're finally glad to get outside. So the student takes a walk to observe the new surroundings and notices certain characteristics of the region, right? So depending on the region they picked, they will pick corresponding characteristics. As they're walking along, they notice a dead fish in what body of water? Okay, so that depends obviously on the region they picked and the place within the region. So you see the students are going to have to ensure that the season, the year, the region, the person, the place within the region, the characteristics, and the body of water, all make sense. So once they've identified that body of water in this, then they'll notice that they continue to investigate to see if they can find any clues. And they happen upon more dead fish in the large body of water, right? So we have them identify a small body of water here that leads to a large body of water here, okay? Connecting back to what they've learned about we all live downstream. That's where this is going to come into play. All right. And then they find that there are more dead fish. And so they want to figure out what happened. And this is the mystery of why these fish are dead and floating belly up in the water. So one thing to really talk about with your students to prime them before this task is that, making sense of this paragraph. Did the person they chose, and this is a historical figure. So the person from the year selected, this is a historical figure. Did they actually live in that region? Because if not, then you either need to change your person or you need to change the region. Is the body of water they selected actually located in that region? What are the characteristics of the region that they noted? Because let's make sure that, those are accurate. So even though this looks, like a simple task because it's not a very lengthy paragraph, it really is going to bring a lot of connections in content that students have learned throughout the year. It's absolutely appropriate, and we highly encourage you to provide feedback to your students as they work their way through this and through any other task, right? They don't have to be out there on their own doing this. This is not a standardized test where you do not help or support or guide. Thankfully, with these performance-based tasks, we want to give that immediate specific feedback to students so they can make corrections, so they know what they're doing well, so they know some errors, and they can work through those. So it doesn't mean that we would tell a student that, they're correct or incorrect, but rather you're asking questions to provide prompts that allow the students to determine that, and allow the students to think deeply. And so since students' level of understanding will undoubtedly vary, so will your support. You might have students who can do this without any support at all, without any prompting. Great, let them fly, let them roll. But if not, then you want to be checking in with all students, but also conferring with those who may need a little bit more support, putting these things together. I'm specifically thinking of students with an IEP. I think it would be important to perhaps talk with their special educator, their case manager, about this, making sure that accommodations, modifications are put into place, and any way that you might be able to slightly modify or alter this in order to provide them with what they need. So maybe instead of picking from an innumerable amount of resources, perhaps some of those are chosen for them, and that choice isn't quite as expansive, just so that it's not overwhelming. But your students, what they need and what they don't need, and that's where those relationships really come into play, when you are able to understand what kind of supports they may need at what time. So the goal is not that necessarily students should be like 100% proficient when they're completing the task, but they should be 100% proficient or more proficient than before by the time it's completed, right? So students hit mastery at different times. We know that. So it's not that all of the instruction is over and then they do this. It's we're going to teach a little bit and then we're going to complete. We're going to teach and learn a little bit and then we're going to complete, right? So again, you can take this task over the course of several days, several weeks of the quarter, and just come back to it and revisit it and let them apply what they are learning in the classroom as they move along. So Now we're going to look at the next part. Now the student has their place, their year, their season, their person, their bodies of water. They have all of those details. So they're going to come to this graphic organizer to kind of piece it together. Please note that this is an example here for your eyes. It's not included in the student pages, right? I think we all have experienced either personally or with our students, somebody giving you an idea for something, and then that's all you can think about. And it's like your ideas just aren't coming because your mind is just going to whatever that person shared. So again, you can decide to share this with your students, or you can just use it as an example of what their work should look like. So here they basically pull that information from that paragraph and put it into this table, just so they can see it, so that it looks a little bit more neat for them, and they have that information readily available without all of that other text. So these were the details that we chose for this example. And again, the sky is almost the limit in terms of what our students choose here. And quite honestly, if you've been teaching Virginia Studies for some time, you know that the time period that Virginia Studies covers is pretty big. And of course, we by no means talk about all of the important people from history, just because that's impossible. So your students may come to you and say, look, I know I studied about this person, or I learned about this person from this time period. And he was from Jamestown, but we didn't learn about him, or we didn't learn about her. Can I focus on that? Absolutely. Absolutely. Please let your students have that choice and that voice. And if it is something that they are interested in, let them run with it, because, when they're motivated and when they're encouraged and when they have that buy-in, they're going to be far more likely to, put their all into this activity and get out of it what we want them to get out of it. So the next part of the task is going to be developing a hypothesis about what is causing the fish to die. So again, here we go with the integrated content, science, and social studies. And they need to explain their thinking. They should consider details of the graphic organizer right here, and include historical content and vocabulary. Along with the text, they can also use drawings as part of their explanation. Conducting any research, using notes from the watershed lesson, such as their textbooks, maps, pictures, any documents that they might have, is absolutely encouraged and allowed, right? We want the students to use any resources at their disposal to help them develop this hypothesis. So here they will type why they think what is causing these fish to die, what their explanation is for coming up with that hypothesis. Why do they think this is the cause? And then they are to come up with some possible solutions to fix that problem. So here is where we're really going to see if students can make a connection between, the watershed model and history, really. So you might have to give your students some prompts again here for them to think about it and say, okay, you have identified a small body of water and a larger body of water as to where you found the fish. And you are saying that the 50 fish were in the James River during the 1620 time period. And so this is a great opportunity for you to do a think aloud. So you would think, okay, well, what was happening during the 1620 time period? Okay, so it was spring and it was raining and people were arriving, people were settling, they're, building, all of those things that are happening, and what might be, polluting the water, what might be traveling downstream into the water, causing these fish to die. So you might want to conduct a think aloud to guide students to really make that connection between the body of water, the time period, what was happening during that time period, and then what during that time period that was occurring that might be causing these fish to die. Okay. So the students will complete that and list any of the sources of information used. Then the last piece is the students will design a presentation in a format of their choice to share their observations, their hypothesis to community members so that they can help solve the mystery. So the community members or leaders are just other people in their class. So perhaps if students are working on this in a group, Group A will present while Group B is the community leaders, and then they would swap. Group B would present while Group A is the community leader group. And so the group or the individual will present to the community leaders and say, this is our hypothesis as to why the fish are dying in our area. This is why we think it's happening, and this is how we think we can solve it. And so that community leader group will hear all of that. And those students in the community leader group will need to pay attention because they will be assessing whether or not that hypothesis is feasible, is sensible, and whether those possible solutions would help the problem. So the community leader group will use this checklist to gauge the presentation of the group they're listening to. So the things that they will be listening for are the time period, season, events, historical figures, region, artifacts, if they're used, were accurately shared in the overview. So all of those things that I talked about in that closed paragraph, they're accurate and they're sensible. Did they have a reasonable hypothesis? Did the hypothesis make sense for the time period and other items discussed? Do the students have 2 or more explanations offered that are reasonable and match up to the hypothesis? And at least 2 possible solutions were created to address the problem and the hypothesis. So the community leaders will need to listen carefully. Each one will get this checklist. So the community leader doesn't do this as a group, they do it as individuals. They check if it's there, and if it's missing, or even if it's there, they should give the group some feedback and some suggestions. You can certainly collect this, but then at some point, the student who presented should certainly see this. So if they need to make changes, they can use this to guide them in what changes may need to be made. After presenting and after getting the feedback from the community leaders, let's say we're sticking with Group A, they will now create a proposed rule for the community in order to preserve a healthy population of plants and animals. The new rule can be announced to all community members in the form of a newspaper advertisement, a commercial, poster, flyer, or anything else that the students may come up with that is approved by you. So Group A will collaborate to come up with the rule and how they want to share that rule with the community members. So again, giving students a choice and a voice in what they want that to look like. So again, many options. The final piece of this is, with Inspire 2025, we know how vital it is to not only provide opportunities for students to learn academic content, but for students to learn lifelong skills. And we call those the competencies, right? Problem solving, communicating, collaborating, persevering, having empathy. So in this section, that's where you have an opportunity to assess your students' ability to demonstrate some of those. And it's by simply asking them the question, what did you do to help your group? You can certainly let the students know that, hey, I'm going to ask you this question at the end of all this, and I'm going to want to know what it is that you did and how you contributed to your group. We don't give grades for participation, right? When we think about equitable grading, participation is not an SOL. So we don't give, participation grades or, extra credit or anything like this if they hit certain competencies. We stick with the rubric, but it gives the students an opportunity to reflect on the role that they played in the group, and honestly, whether or not they played a helpful role. And if they conclude that they did, great, that's something we want to continue. If they conclude that they didn't, then okay, let's have a conversation about that and figure out what it is that we can do the next time. So that's the end of this task. And I know a lot of information has been shared. And honestly, even as we created this, I continue to go back and review it and wrap my mind around it and picture it, because I'm very much a hands-on person and I need to do something to understand it the most. And I realize maybe some of you are in that same place too, right? So we highly encourage you to reach out to us, to have a conversation with us, to meet with us, your instructional supervisor, if you need further clarification on this, or if you just want to talk through it with somebody. But I do have confidence that the more you look at it, the more you review it, perhaps even having a conversation with your team, or if you have coaches within your building, having a conversation with them, it will start to come together. You will start to see it. It's just like sometimes looking at FOSS lessons and thinking, what does this look like when I put it into practice? Of course, that first time you might have some bumps, and that's okay, that's expected. But we do, as Sharon mentioned, want you to give us some very honest feedback as to what went well, what can go better, and also what the students thought about it. So please be eliciting some feedback from them either during or after this task. Finally, I'm going to come back to this page, and what I want to show you is the standards listed here are the standards that are covered by doing the entire We All Live Downstream task. So the watershed model itself only touches on a couple of the 4.1s and 4.8a. That's it. But by doing all of the tasks listed, you will hit all of these SOLs. And they are noted on the lesson plans, which you are covering. Obviously, the mystery of the dead fish is all history, so that's where the history standards come into play. But just so you know, these standards represent the standards in the entire We All Live Downstream task, which includes the watershed model and the mystery of the dead fish. Finally, before we turn it back over to Sharon to talk about how we kind of wrap this all up with a field experience, I just wanted to jump in and show you the rubric that you will use solely for Virginia studies. As Sharon mentioned before, there is not a rubric for science. We gave the recommendation or just the suggestion of using the 3-2-1. Yes, it was a suggestion. Okay, I know recommendation kind of comes along with a connotation of, oh, I have to use that. No, it's a suggestion. So however you decide to assess the science is up to you. Maybe the students take a picture of their watershed model on Seesaw and they describe to you on a video what happened with the water, when it was sprayed on that landscape. So that's completely up to you. What we don't have an option with is the Virginia Studies piece. So the state has used rubrics to assess this local alternative assessment that we're giving in place of the SOL test this year. So this is what students should see. This is what parents will also see. And much like those of you who previously gave the fourth grade writing predictor test, you'll understand that as we grade or as we assess students' understanding, we're looking at this holistically. And if you've done local alternative assessments before with Frederick County, you'll know our process. So when we look at just the history standards, okay, we have those listed in the left-hand column, you'll notice that for A, D, B, C, I, and J, we're giving one score. So you will take a look at each of these standards. You'll look at the criteria for an excellent, a proficient, an approaching, and an emerging, and gain an understanding of where the student is in relation to this specific bullet. But then really you take a step back and you're looking at it overall. So that's where the holistically comes into place. We do not say, okay, for VS1A, they got a 3. For VS1D, they got a 2. That is not how we score. We score holistically, giving one score for the entire task. And so as you are scoring these, if you let your supervisor assigned to your building know that you're doing this, we are more than happy to come out and help take a little bit of that load off, or to have that conversation with you, or to just be a part of that discussion in whatever way we might be able to support you. We recognize it's going to be the end of the year and you have a lot going on. So if we can help with that, please have us help with that. I do want to point out, we have bolded some of these words, and that's really just to draw your attention in how to differentiate between a 1, 2, a 3, or a 4. This is going above and beyond the standard. Okay, so a 4 or excellent is, taking it kind of to the next level, right? So that would mean that a 3 is performing on grade level. So when parents are given that report, they will know their student is right where they need to be. They performed on grade level overall with this task. 2 is certainly performing just below grade level, and 1 would be performing more than 1 grade level behind. But hopefully most of our students might not live in this column, especially if we are providing assistance, providing prompts, and providing guidance along the way. I do recognize that sometimes we will have students who might be here, but recognize that you can help them. If you notice that they are here early on and you can guide them and prompt them so that they could be approaching, that is certainly acceptable. So in the end, you will use this to score the student's performance, and you will come back into the spreadsheet that Sharon had shared in the beginning. And depending on, which student you have assessed, you will put the score in that blank. For the last piece of this, and I thank you so much for hanging on. We thought that we might go a little bit over, but we thought you probably would prefer to go over by 5 or 10 minutes, then come together again in another session. So Sharon's gonna wrap this up for us, and please don't hesitate to reach out if you guys have any questions about any of this.
All right, and finally, the last thing Linda has on the screen is that post-activity. That you'll be providing your students this opportunity as a field experience at your school, okay, on the school grounds or someplace close by if you're able to do that. But we also know that field trips aren't allowed to do this. So students should investigate the schoolyard or the local ecosystem to identify questions, problems, or issues that affect a natural resource in the area and determine a possible solution for that. So the question that you're going to ask them is, how will I change my behavior or views to be a more responsible citizen to help preserve our watershed? And then what steps will I take? For example, if they go outside and they see some puddling around the school that's causing kids to walk through that, what could they do about that puddling? What could they take part in? What if they see, I know at some schools they have some bird issues. What if they see, and this is all a part of the watershed because everything goes into it. So what if they see a lot of bird feces around? What could they do? How could they make a flyer? Maybe write something or share something with the class. This is so open-ended that maybe it's just a discussion that you have with each of your students, that they come up with some ideas. You can group them any way that you want. There's a lot of flexibility in this last part as well. It's just the culminating activity that pulls everything together to show how important they are in this watershed project. Okay, with that said, I'm going to stop. Okay. Yes, are there any other questions or anything that I missed? Linda?
Well, I just wanted to share one thing that I thought some people might be thinking or might think at some point, that is, do we have to use this as a grade in our grade book? And the answer to that is no. You do not have to use this as a grade in your grade book, but you may certainly do that. If you want to take a spelling, grammar, English writing grade for this, you can certainly do that. But please don't let those components affect the grade or the rating that the student gets on a rubric, right? We know that equitable grading practices ensure that we are assessing the proper content. And in this case, on this rubric, it was social studies. So spelling, grammar, and those other components should not affect that. And additionally, if it is used as a grade in the grade book, it should not be put in as a 0 if a student does not complete it, right? Or whatever grade you may typically put in for an incomplete. We mentioned earlier, you should make contact with the student's parents or guardians if that is an issue. And again, just thinking about, equitable grading, the sole purpose of grading is to communicate to students and their parents how they're performing in comparison to an SOL. So putting a 0 or any other grade for that matter is a signal in the grade book that the student shows absolutely no understanding in the work that they've done. So on the other hand, that's when we use the incomplete that you would indicate to show that the student did not complete it.
One last thing that we'd like to remind you of is to make sure that you work as a grade level team to ensure 10% of the samples from your class are uploaded into the site in that folder, and it will designate the correct folder for you to add these. If you have any trouble doing that, please let us know. Thank you again and have a great day.